All right, well, thanks for coming, everyone. Instead of hearing me rant at lunch, now you have to endure a full hour-long rant in a classroom setting. So it's very exciting. The reason I wanted to make this model is really sort of, I guess, in my mind for a long time, just being engaged with futurist literature and futurist thinking, and what I have sort of come to see as the default assumption within the entire community of thinkers, people who are interested about the future, is sort of this assumption that we're going to be able to eventually, through technological innovation, get to some sort of utopia without ever questioning fundamentally the structure of our civilization and how we make decisions. And I mean, in a real way. I mean, not in a silly way, and I think, or in an inconsequential, or just in an academic or a theoretical way. So in many ways, a lot of the heavy lifting within futurist theory is thought, oh, we're just going to ride our technological evolution to utopia without ever thinking about the way we use these technologies to reorganize fundamentally the nature of society. And really, when I think about technological evolution and what's possible, to me, I see the opposite of what's happening. What I see is happening is that current control structures are trying to make us believe that the way we organize can be no other way, when really technological evolution allows us and gives us the amazing opportunity for the first time in the history of civilization to organize in new ways, in different ways, in ways we've never thought about before, and in various ways, not just in one homogeneous way. And so what I think the usefulness of this model is that it's not how are we going to get to some sort of global village necessarily, but it's a model to help us situate proposals for different types of societies, and to really help us understand that these nation states that are currently the top control structures in our world, they aren't, as we were saying in the meeting yesterday, nation states aren't a part of the law of physics. They're not the law of, it's not like gravity. These are constructed by humans. They have a beginning in time, and they will have an end. And sort of what the model tries to show is that the nature of our control systems are very much dependent on cybernetic principles and energetic and informational properties of our system, and how we use these informational and energetic properties in our system. So I start off with the first quote, which really sort of, in my mind, this quote sort of encapsulates what our system's going through in many ways. Is the universe is evolving. The organizing of matter is constantly growing more complex. This growing complexity occurs through metasystem transitions, from which new levels of organization emerge, which are levels of a control hierarchy. And I think the reason why Valentin Turchin's Phenomenon of Science was so useful, and why theorists here have sort of kept the metasystem transition theory alive and going, and is because it really talks about the nature of control transitions and the nature of how higher complexity emerges in living systems, which is really more sophisticated in its understanding of the evolution of complexity than everything else I hear, from the rest of the futurist community, because they don't talk about the nature of our system organization at all, and so without really understanding our system organization and how it evolves, we're sort of we're in the dark on where we're going and where we're heading this century. So just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. Specifically, I'm going to try and convince you that our control systems are failing, and that they can't align a global goal state, and that in their current organizational structure, they're not going to be able to organize a global goal state. That in fact, they're driving us off a cliff in many ways. And in many ways, the world is getting better, but in many ways, on the other hand, there are large-scale trends related to ecology, economy, and our social lives that don't look promising, and it doesn't look like nation-states are going to be able to help us with this. So then I'm going to be talking about the model to help us really situate the nature of human control systems and transitions that have occurred in the past. and that will be the most of the talk, talking about the nature of control systems in human evolution, sort of explaining how they change, and then sort of coming up with a way to understand 21st century control transitions. So first, I mean, the science of cybernetics is really founded in many ways on issues of information and complexity and sort of how we organize, with the informational properties of our system. And even in the ancient Greek terminology of Kybernetes, it was really meant to help us understand how we come up with collective decision-making, how we organize ourselves in really an evolutionary maze where no one really knows where we're going or what the end goal is. I mean, and those are serious discussions. I mean, thinking about what it is we're doing here and what it is we want out of the 21st century and what it is we want out of technological evolution and what's the vision of our governments. These are all questions that are hardly ever really discussed, and they're essentially cybernetic questions. So again, what the model is trying to do is trying to give us some sort of context and vision for what they should be going forward. And it sort of reminds me of the famous Marshall McLuhan line saying we drive into the future using only our rear view mirror. And what I sort of want this model to be is to sort of give us some look at what the driver's window looks like. And it's not just looking into the rear view mirror blindly, trusting and putting our faith in nation states to get us there, but to actively organize new systems that make sense in the 21st century. So first, I mean, if you haven't read The State of the Future, I definitely recommend it. What it does is give you, it sort of throws out either the dystopian narratives or the utopian narratives of what the future could be, and it sort of gives you a level-headed, practical, empirical, quantitative analysis of what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And where we're winning, there's lots of reasons to be optimistic, and I'm an optimist in my heart about where I think the future is going. But there are a lot of things that are just, in 2014, it's sort of embarrassing, and really we're losing in areas where we shouldn't be losing, that are easily solvable problems. And it's not that any of us aren't smart enough to solve these problems. It's just that the nation state as an organization is not capable of handling them. And this is just a list of some of the important ones, and I'm going to sort of bring your focus to one that I think is really important. But here's just the quantification that they do every year, and it's instead of GDP, instead of using just GDP to sort of say, oh, is the economy doing well, is it not doing well? This sort of takes into account ecological factors, economic factors, social factors, about how we're doing, and it sort of gives you a look about, what is 2025 going to look like? What is 2030 going to look like? And really, when I see this chart, and what I find alarming, potentially alarming about this chart, and it's not super noticeable at the moment, but you can see here in 2008 we've leveled off. That there was steady progress, and there's steady progress, and then from 2008 to here it's sort of like we've leveled off. And of course, the financial collapse in 2008 is a big part of this, but also, I bring your attention to the fact that many of the solutions that were proposed and implemented after the 2008 financial collapse haven't solved anything. Not anything fundamental in the nature of our system. And what I'm worried about is this next line here. When you consider the many wrong decisions and good decisions not taken day after day, year after year around the world, it is amazing that we're still making as much progress as we are. And that's sort of what I really want to bring everyone's attention to, is that, yes, we've made a lot of progress in the last 100 years. But because our decision-making institutions are so out of touch with the current realities of our planet, it's conceivable that we just that there are some problems in this world that are so big, and I'm going to talk about one in a second, that we could start to go off a cliff. if we don't rethink the way
What's the extrapolation based on? Because the extrapolation seems to say that it will continue to go up.
Well, you could come up with a numerous extrapolations, and like it's sort of this is Jerome Glenn's and Elizabeth Fortescue's extrapolation of if it was the previous year and you'd extrapolate this way, but now it's just like this way and you extrapolate this way. So it's hard to say. You could come up with a number of extrapolations, and it's sort of dependent on so many factors that the extrapolation isn't necessarily as important to me as the direction of this curve that we see manifesting since 2008, which is a leveling off, and I think it's a leveling off for certain factors that I'm going to identify in a moment. One, we're going about globalization in the wrong way, but so let me just sort of make the argument that what we have is a structural control issue, and the idea that our institutions, and this is what we were sort of talking about yesterday in the meeting, is that our institutions are a type of social technology. How we design these institutions is important. How they work is important. And now that they're plagued with we shouldn't necessarily be surprised that they're plagued with inefficiency and corruption, because they haven't been, seriously, fundamentally reorganized in a few centuries now. I mean, they're essentially built on the nation-state model that the United States government established in the late 19th, or the late 18th century. So they were established at a time when Morse code was a frontier information technology. I mean, in one of Francis's paper on the global brain, he talks about how in the industrial period, ephemeralization has led to information technologies increasing the speed at which we share information over a billionfold. And these institutions were designed at a time where they were just using the telegraph was a frontier technology. We have different information technologies. We can make decisions in different ways now. So it's sort of like remaining faithful to structures that were established in a previous era doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. And this is really the heart of the biggest one. I mean, if you haven't read Capital in the 21st Century, read it. It's being called the best economics book in 10 years for a reason. Not just because it identifies a fundamental structural problem with modern capitalism, but also because it is a very data-driven empirical analysis of the economic system over the last 200, 300 years. And for futurists, it's great as well, because the third part of the book is essentially a work of futurism, where he gives you recommendations about what capital should be used for in the 21st century and how our government should be behaving in a new world. One of the most alarming things, and he's very level-headed, so this quote is to be taken seriously. I would even go farther than what he's saying here, is that the economic history of the 20th century suggests that the risk of a drift towards oligarchy is real, and it gives little reason for optimism about where the United States is headed. The way I would go further than that is that the drift towards oligarchy is a global problem. It's not a United States problem. What's happening, and for anyone who doesn't really know what oligarchy is, it just means a government in which is controlled by a very small economic elite that essentially buy all of the politicians, and that when you're voting for them, you're not really voting for anyone that's serving your interests. You're voting for two candidates that are both serving. They're puppets for a larger economic apparatus. And this is what's happening on a global scale now. And so our politicians don't serve us. The economic system is completely rigged. And this is the result. So I'm not against capitalism. I'm against this. This is embarrassing. Half of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of people on our planet. 85 of the richest people in the world have more than 3.5 billion. This is globalization gone mad. This is something that the academic system has let happen without even putting up any fight whatsoever. We just get up and go to work and continue doing the same thing while our entire system has been bought, and this has happened? This is absurd. And the worst is, since 2008, 95% of economic growth has gone to the 1%. So this is what I mean. The problem that caused the 2008 financial collapse has gone unfixed. It's just getting worse. And it's about to get even worse, potentially. And this is why we could go off a cliff. This is why. So it's not really globalization that's happening. I want to give you an example of why I chose these two pictures here. What's happening is not, the anti-globalization movement isn't anti-globalization. They're against billionaireization, which is that there are two things that are happening. And remember, billionaires are a new phenomenon. Like, it's not like there were billionaires in 1960, really. Now we have this large group of people that have more money than you could possibly ever spend in one lifetime. And they're spending it in two ways. There's one group of billionaires that are spending it to buy politicians. And they're buying all of the politicians. Right? These two people are causing, in my mind, a collapse that's more important to be aware of and more important to be scared of than even global warming.
So who are they?
There's David and Charles Koch. They own Koch Industries. They're both fossil fuel barons. And this is important for the model I'm going to be talking about. They're both fossil fuel barons. And what they want to do, and what they are successfully doing, is buying every American politician, Democrat and Republican. And what they want to do is essentially establish an oligarchic fossil fuel baron civilization where everything is privatized, where there is no public school, where there is no public education or no public facilities, whatever. They want to completely erode the governmental structures that exist and put in its place just a privatized wasteland. They could literally single-handedly bring us towards an economic collapse. And they have enough money to do it. They made $9 billion last year. They're both worth a collectively $90 billion. They've just passed in the Supreme Court a bill that allows them to spend as much money as they would like, meaning that they could just say, here's $500 million, you now work for me. This has already happened. This is happening. This is what we should be looking at in 2016. This is what we should be paying attention to. And nothing else really matters. This is happening right now. And this is not just happening in America, this is happening in India. This is happening in Russia. This is happening in Brazil. It's not secret. And we don't need conspiracy theories. There are a bunch of people who have conspiracy theories about what's happening. You don't need conspiracy theories. They're explicit about it. You can go online and if they're open about it. They did a big New York Times op-ed on one person who's friends with them who says what he would like to have is a system where you get as many votes as you have dollars. This is what they'd like to do. I'm not saying that this is inevitable, but if we don't fight it, they could cause serious economic problems, more so than they already have. The other example, why I put Bill Gates up here, is Bill Gates is an example of the billionaire who's actually using his money for good. But my problem with this is that Bill Gates, for example, he's given the most money to help fight Ebola. For example, $50 million or something to fight Ebola. But the reason people like him need to do this is because we don't have the infrastructure to deal with global problems. We can't come together and cooperate and build a civilization together that works for everyone, where people don't feel disenfranchised and marginalized. This is why ISIS exists, is because there are people in this world that realize, they take a look at the economic infrastructure of our world and they get angry. And they should be angry. We should all be angry about this. And so what we have is a situation where billionaires are playing around on the global scale because we haven't realized yet that we need to collaborate and cooperate together on a global scale. We can't just let globalization be billionaireization. This is a new world. We have to be serious about it. Or else all of these problems are going to get worse. The reason why, voter turnout's so bad is because everyone's realizing that the system doesn't work for them anyway. There's no reason to vote anyway. So this is a fundamental structural problem we haven't yet confronted. And again, I was just giving one example. I could talk for a long time about all of the problems that are going on, but so what I really want to address and what I want to sort of use the model for is to answer these questions. Why are our controls failing? And what should we do now? So the model's pretty simple, and I'm not saying this model is the reality, and this is sort of what I was getting at the Cybernetics conference I went to. This isn't the reality of like the exact thing that's happened, but it's a simplified understanding of how control systems operate, and I think it really helps contextualize what's happening. So, the simple sort of rundown of it is that emergent information mediums are used by control systems to harness energy and control energy, and that when these control structures emerge, this fundamental informational and energetic property allows for their continued stabilization, or for their collapse. And if we'll analyze here that there have been basically 3 fundamental systems that have existed in our past, and what I would be arguing today is that right now we're going through a system transition of a similar magnitude as the transition to industry, or as the transition to agriculture, or as the transition to becoming human in the first place. And the informational and the energetic properties and the control systems used to control that informational and energetic properties will be as different from the worlds we lived in the industrial period and the agricultural period. So this is a simplified model that you're reading here, is that language, was used to control and stabilize a hunting regime, which allowed us to organize into bands and tribes. That writing was used to control agricultural surplus in order for us to stabilize chiefdoms and kingdoms. And that printing press technologies allowed us to organize new fossil fuel regimes to allow us to stabilize nation states. And that this fundamental informational energetic relationship here is what's crumbling and what is trying to be maintained very vigorously, and it's why we can't yet get to the net, or why we're going through some sort of strange control system process, which is leaving most people out of the globalization picture. So the first, the theoretical foundations for this, first is metasystem transition theory. So is the idea that evolution goes through punctuated equilibrium like cybernetic processes where new qualitative levels of organization emerge. And this happens from the integration of subsystems. So if you want to simply understand our system today, that the subsystems that would need to be integrated are nation states, whereas the information medium needed to connect them would be the internet, very simply. And that when a higher information medium emerges, the previous disparate subsystems are now in a different informational landscape, and they need to readjust to the new informational landscape that's emerged. And that in history, the replication of the highest control system, can lead to further metasystem transitions and further integration of subsystems. So this would just be another quote from Turchin. The appearance of the human society is a large-scale metasystem transition in which the subsystems being integrated are whole superorganisms. So in terms of whole superorganisms, this is the idea that nation-states are superorganism-like entities, and that this is sort of that the internet is a neural network or emerging global brain that is going to bring us all together into an integrated whole. The second foundation, which I think is an important addition, is helping understand, and this is sort of really where I got the idea that these informational and energetic relationships are on some sort of feedback loop, is control information theory. It's a theory to help us understand how living systems use their informational power to control energetic resources. And that essentially you could measure the control information power of a system by how it uses information to acquire, dispossess, and utilize energy for control and feedback processes. And so this is essentially what our control systems do. They use the highest information medium to essentially erect a energy level. So, for example, in America, they'll use print media to, as much propaganda as can be, sensibly shoved down people's throats, to make sure that the status quo in regards to fossil fuels is maintained. And so this sort of control system relationship has been going on throughout human evolution, but now it's fundamentally changing, and this is causing the disruption that we're seeing. And so, just an example here is that when a new information medium emerges, it increases information or control information potentiality, or IP. So an example of this would be, and control systems could use this against us, or we could use it, or you could use it, for our betterment. An example of this would be NSA spying, would be a good example. So the information medium gives control systems higher information potentiality. Now, because we're in a world with old control systems, for example, they use that information potentiality to just spy on people. Instead of using the new information potentiality to, enable a higher level of freedom and opportunity for people. And this idea that this IC feedback relationship either allows a metasystem to stabilize or to collapse. So this is, and for example, you could use the example of the United States. You could use the example of ISIS as well. ISIS's stability as a control system is dependent on how they use information to organize their energy supply. You cut off, if for some reason their energy supply is cut off, well then ISIS will collapse. It's as simple as that. So control systems will maintain their energy supply at any cost. And so just a visualization to sort of understand what this means in sort of a simplified visualization is that feedback between these processes allows for the stabilization of control. What we see here is the end of this system. This system as a whole is starting to crumble and erode. And again, we'll talk about this more, but I'm just going to take us through the evolution of the human system quickly. So the first metasystem would be the emergence of small groups into bands and tribes, and so that would be this would be the subsystem integration to a larger system. Chimpanzees go around in groups of 10 or at most 50. When fully modern humans emerged, we were already in groups of 150 to 250. So there was a major increase in subsystem integration that allowed for a new stabilization in the control hierarchy. And how this was achieved was through the evolution of language. Language allowed us to bond larger groups. It allowed us to communicate on a larger scale. It allowed us also to communicate abstract knowledge so that we could go on large hunts. I heard there was a buffalo hole 2 days that way. That's not something chimpanzees could communicate with one another. And it's not that chimpanzees don't want to eat meat. They want to eat meat. It's just that they can't coordinate together as efficiently as modern humans could use with language. And so this allowed for another, an increase in information control for what? A new feedback relationship, an ability to acquire, distribute hunted and cooked animals. And this allowed us to stabilize groups of 150, 250 individuals. This is from Robin Dunbar. For humans, effectively bonded social groups are essential for survival and reproduction. And since grooming has a natural limit on the size of group that can be bonded by it, language was necessary to break through the glass ceiling and allow larger groups to evolve. The next transition was from hunter-gatherer groups of in between 100 and 250 to agricultural civilizations of a much larger size range. The first agricultural civilizations were in between 1,000 and 10,000 people. And this was achieved through written language. In a sense, you could not organize an agricultural civilization unless you had a mechanism to tax people, regulate the agricultural surplus, make sure it was being distributed. And also, writing was almost used as like a magic technology because only some people were literate and most people were not literate, and what was written down was seen almost as a higher power, that they had secret knowledge, and they did have secret knowledge, and that they were using it to control them. and so this information medium did increase the informational energetic properties of the system in that it allowed agricultural civilizations to regulate large areas of farmland, but it also created a massive underclass of individuals. This is the beginning of the 1% and the 99%. And we're still now dealing with the 1% and the 99%, but this is the beginning of that nature of the human system. In each case, writing was a response to increasing social and political complexity. The particular aspect of that complexity that led to the invention of writing was administrative, tracking income, disbursements, and transfers with large organizations. So what this is meant to say is that writing's first function was to organize a new level of information control feedback. It wasn't for poetry. It wasn't for great novels like the Iliad and the Odyssey. That came after. It was first used to control people. The next emergence was industrial civilization, which was a massive increase in the number of people that could be controlled and organized. Again, a subsystem integration of another level, where kingdoms and chiefdoms became usurped by the organization of the nation state. If you go through Europe, you just have to drive through Europe to see this, where the transition first occurred, where you could go through Ireland or you could go through England, and there's numerous kingdoms, but now they're all within the nation state. This happened in India as well, where there was all a bunch of chiefdoms and kingdoms all throughout India, but now they're all within the nation state of India. You get the same in Africa, it's the same everywhere. But it happened first in Europe, and so this is the heartland of the industrial transition. And the mechanism was the printing press. Kings and queens didn't have to worry about the public. Kings and queens didn't have to worry about public opinion. The idea of a citizenry that actually had the power to influence policy decisions. That wasn't something that was a feature of the agricultural world. This was something that was a feature of the print medium. The print medium allowed for things like newspapers. For even, some of the first things the printing press was used for was to print little comedy scripts that attacked the upper class. It's just little, things you would see in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times today, that are essentially just taking a jab at people with too much economic power. But the important thing to understand is with the information-energy relationship, this information-energy relationship that was released, you could pretty much describe the whole of the modern world, I think, with this sentence here, which is that the scientific increases in scientific and technical knowledge, which was really flourished because of the printing press, allowed for the exploitation of fossil fuels. And then the distribution of the higher energy source in fossil fuels allowed for more people to engage with knowledge generated by the printing press. And this relationship between information and energy that has really built the modern world is now fundamentally being undermined. I say here, this is sort of like, this quote's important, I think, because it really speaks to our own time now. The printing press increased the size of the educated and literate classes. Renaissance civilization thus took a leap, calling into play intelligence of more individuals than ever before. Not for much longer would it be enough for kings to win the acquiescence of the nobility and the upper clergy, as was acknowledged by the frantic attempts to control the press. So, the reason why this sort of speaks to our own time is because there's nothing the control system hates more than the internet. The internet allows us to say whatever we'd like. It allows us to distribute and organize with each other and however we would like. There's nothing dictatorships hate in the developing world more than Twitter. For example, is why Turkey wanted to ban Twitter, why all the countries of the Arab Spring wanted to ban Facebook, and why Iran has banned Facebook. It's because our new information medium allows us to organize with each other as humans in ways that were completely impossible before. And I don't think the real power of the internet has been explored yet, but it's impossible to think that control systems are going to be able to continue suppressing an undercurrent of resentment and hatred that's bubbling up everywhere. From Hong Kong to Iran, to Egypt, to Britain, to America. So again, just looking back at the information energy metasystem model, is that what we see here is that control systems are going to keep using the press to brainwash us, to essentially give propaganda, to keep us in fear, to make us believe that we still need them, in order to continue propagating their same agenda, which is essentially keeping the system as it is, which is not transitioning to a new energy economy, which is not allowing us to think about the world as a whole and to make us think about development as a whole, to make us realize that there are billions of people on our planet who have nothing and that we don't do anything to help them at all, and that we leave all of it up to someone like Bill Gates. We can't keep doing that. There's another quote from Piketty's book: "No hypocrisy is too great when economic and financial elites are obliged to defend their interests." And this is a quote from David Graeber in his critique of capital in the 21st century. Graeber doesn't think Piketty goes far enough, which is to say that the 1% are not about to expropriate themselves even if asked nicely, referring to Piketty's book. And they have spent the past 30 years creating a lock on media and politics to ensure no one will do so through electoral means. So this is sort of how I see the last 30 years. And if you read Piketty's book, it bears out in the data as well. And this is not something that's exclusive to America. Again, this is global. This happened in Europe as well, where essentially a small group of people are trying to create governments that would look more like the governments of 1900, where you get nothing, where there are no public schools, where there are no public infrastructure at all, where exactly what we need is the opposite, which is everyone gets free education and everyone gets free healthcare. This should be a human right globally, but they're trying to prevent this new world from emerging. But again, in the context of this model, we have a new information medium. It hasn't established new controls, and it hasn't established a new information-energy relationship. But the contours of this world are emerging. And so, I quote, a series of quotes: "The internet is evolving into one of the most significant enablers of political innovation since the emergence of mass democracy." What I want to call back to the idea, bring us back to the Metasystem model, is that a lot of historians now are making this connection between the emergence of the printing press and the emergence of the internet. They see the parallels between these two, the relationships that emerged between the public and the control system, and that this acknowledgement that these two systems have produced similar types of qualities is something we should pay more attention to in terms of how we organize and make decisions about our current world. Because the world is better educated and increasingly connected, people are becoming less tolerant of the abuse of elite power in the past. This is what I was speaking to about things like the Occupy movement, about things like the Arab Spring, about things like what's going on in Hong Kong. You know, the information's out there now. It's not to say that but again, it's not an inevitability. It's up to us to organize together and come together. It can't just happen on its own. And that's sort of why I want to make this more of an issue in academia, because academics don't seem to be helping very much with this. The people in academia don't seem to be helping very much. That's another quote: "The internet era is very similar in important areas to the printing press era, and because the printing press had broad and profound effects on its age, we should expect similarly broad and profound effects in the information age." One of the reasons, the printing press created, again, this idea of a public citizenry that should be held, where that holds the control systems in their territories responsible for the policies that are passed. Well, what the internet's doing is essentially creating a global consciousness, a global awareness of what's happening on our planet, everywhere. That we care as much about a kid in Yemen as we care about a kid in Belgium. That these aren't. The narratives that some groups of people are more important, that we should care about some groups of people more than others, is just propaganda. And until we're serious about organizing on another level, the problems that we see happening in the developing world are just going to keep getting worse. So, in terms of the global metasystem, the potential of a global metasystem, I guess, is not inevitable. But the internet is a new information medium in which we could organize a different type of society. However, there are no new controls in the sense that previous metasystems developed their own controls and that they developed a new information-energy relationship. But it could be that we're writing the beginnings of one, and it's up to us to decide how we use our new information medium to build different control structures and to build a different type of energetic relationship with the planet. And then on the other hand, I mean, how long can the current system be maintained? I mean, I think it's all about how long they can keep us dependent on fossil fuels. That's what I'll talk about more in a little bit. But if you look at the control hierarchy, again, just expanded, there's a potential for a different type of system which could emerge with the full stabilization of a relationship between the internet and renewables, or the internet and fusion energy. That this metasystem would involve the dissolution of the nation state. I don't think what we need is a global state. I don't think anyone wants a global state, because that's just the concentration of power in yet another higher level. What we want is the dissolution of power and a way, and the internet sort of gives us this ability, is the ability to have distributed decision making, to have collective decision making in a way that we've never been able to do before. You know, in some ways we've never really had democracy. I don't feel not radical democracy. It's always been decisions are controlled by a small economic group of people who are more well educated than everyone else, that are essentially, in some ways you could say, taking advantage of everyone else. But we could create a world in which decision making was transparent, where decision making was truly, you know, outsourced and collective. Where and I'll talk about that more in a sense.
Just one remark about the energy.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Just let me say this one quote first about the relationship between the internet and renewables. This is from Jeremy Rifkin's new book. Internet technology and renewable energies are beginning to merge to create an energy internet that will change the way power is generated and distributed in society. In the coming era, hundreds of millions of people will produce their own renewable energy in their homes, offices, and factories, and share green electricity with each other on an energy internet, just as we now generate and share information online. This is potential. We could do this. I think this is the key for organizing new types of societies. We need to be energy independent. Unless we're energy independent, we're dependent on the control system. So we have to design societies where societies are self-sustaining and they don't need where they're off-grid. They're off-grid, and they can self-organize on their own. And so then the information-energy relationship would be, of the new system, would be something like this. But the key is that this would be a different type of thinking about global organization, where you really emphasize the local organization towards, and I don't really understand yet how this could happen. You know, it's just a framework or a working idea of how to think about these control transitions. But then thinking about control in the 21st century, it suggests that new controls will emerge, but it's dependent on functional innovation, cooperative synergies, utilizing a new information medium, and abundant renewable energy. So again, there's two sides of this. I mean, we have to come together and organize in different ways. We have to use the technology at our disposal here now to think about different types of systems, different types of societies. One of the ideas is a distributed digital democracy, and really the idea of the distributed digital democracy is that we vote on ideas instead of politicians. And so this would flip it in a sense, is that you take out the middleman, and that we all vote on what type of society collectively we would like, on the local level to the global level and everything in between. But we vote on the ideas themselves, and instead of voting on people that can be corrupted by external influences. And then we hire, we collectively hire people to sort of, again, it's not that we'd have no government, but it's just that government would be radically distributed. And a final sort of thought is that, if emergence is the arising of novel and coherent structures or patterns that are part of a self-organizing process, it's still not magic. meaning that we have to come together and cooperate in new ways. It's not just going to happen on its own. If we leave the control systems as they are, they're going to keep doing the same things they're doing. And the inequality is going to get worse, and the ecological devastation is going to get worse. And we're going to continue to live in a world where most people don't feel like they're a part of it. And we're going to continue to live in a world where most people don't feel they have a future. And they're right to feel that way. Because they don't have a future and they aren't in the system isn't working for them. So it's going to take higher levels of cooperation, which means that what we're suffering from right now is really a crisis in global consciousness. That most of us don't think about everyone on the planet. Most of us don't think about the world as a whole. Most of us don't care that our control structures are very parochial in their interests, and they don't really have any vision at all. I mean, they don't have a vision about where we're going to be in 2035. They don't have a vision about where we're going to be in 2050. Not really. I mean, and the billionaires that are controlling our control system, they definitely don't have a cosmic vision. Their vision is more money. Like $9 billion last year wasn't enough. That's their vision. It's a far cry from the idea of a global village as an idea for the future of civilization. But where are these conversations on a national stage? These conversations aren't had on the national stage. I mean, they'll scare you to death about ISIS and they'll scare you to death about Ebola, but they won't scare you to death about economic and income inequality. When that's what you should be scared of. And so we have to find a way to upgrade our control system. As I was saying in the meeting yesterday, an iPad 10 isn't going to help. It has to be that we use these technologies in new ways. Or else and we have to build a civilization that we can be proud of. I want to be proud of this civilization. That's why I'm here at the Global Brain Institute, because I would like us to have a world that we can all be proud of, where we can have a civilization where the decisions that are made are decisions that reflect all of our values. Because if I was to sit down and have coffee with any of you, I know that you wouldn't approve of policies that support never-ending war. I'll tell you, war will never lead to peace. It's never happened. War doesn't lead to peace. So as long as we keep fighting one another, and as long as we have control systems where their default response to problems is more war, it's never going to stop. And the technologies we're getting in the 21st century are scary. America is right now playing around with artificial intelligence and robotics in the military. Where do you think it's going to come from first? This is serious. I mean, that's scarier than the atomic bomb. I don't want humanoid robots fighting ISIS. But in 2025, that's what it'll be if we don't do something about it. And it's just important to keep remembering this. I mean, in some ways, the academic level of thought is so much higher than the level of thought we have to put up with from our control system, is that they haven't grown up. They haven't grown up. We all can think like this. And when we see this, I don't even need to say anything. Just look at the image. We're just here on a tiny dot suspended in a sunbeam, and we can't figure out how to all cooperate and get along together. But this is what we have to do now. It's very simple. So just an overview of the main points is that our control systems are fucked up. that I tried to build a model that helped to simplify the types of things that are going on right now in terms of simple informational energetic property that if we can use our new information medium to organize energy in a new way, we can build different types of societies. But unless we're energy independent, that seems to be just a nice idea. That at the end of the day, the fundamental currency in our universe is energy. And that's to our advantage, because it's not money. If it was money, then we'd be in trouble. But it's not money. It's energy. And so we have to take advantage in a radical way, the types of powers that we have available to us now, because they're novel in the history of human civilization. And to think that the structures that we have on our planet now are just or legitimate, I mean, think about the history of humanity. It's a history of scarcity. It's a history of not knowing where we are. It's a history of non-stop fighting with each other. And now, for the first time, we're given the potential opportunity. Well, one, we have a much better idea of where we are than we ever have before in human history. We can come together and communicate with each other in ways that we've never been able to before. I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm just saying that let's make this a priority for academics. I mean, if academics is for anything, it's for improving the human condition. And that's all.